Hi everyone, my name is Joseph Bonifacio. I'm one of the campus missionaries with Every Nation here in the Philippines. And you're listening to the Victory Leadership Podcast. Today we have with us again Dr. Rice Brooks. He's the co-founder of Victory and Every Nation and also the author of God's Not Dead and Man with Messiah. It's good to have you back, Pastor Rice.
Thank you, Joe.
Now, God's Not Dead. Whatever inspired you to write that book? It became a bestseller, it became a best-seen movie. It's become a phenomenon around the world. Why did you write that book?
There was a song called God's Not Dead by a singing group called the Newsboys.
Okay.
So one of the main guys pulled up in my driveway and he said, listen to this song. And I said, man, that's going to be a hit. This is going to be a great song. So I worked with them on a music video. So I had the challenge of, they did the song on a music video, and how do you put the apologetic themes to show God's Not Dead in a 3-minute music video? So ended up working out well, and the video's been seen 30 million times or something like that.
Wow.
So that in itself was enough. But then I said, let me write some more down. I had the God test, obviously, that little tool that we've talked about that helps people. But I just began to write the story of, if you're asked the question, how do you know God exists, what would you say? And so I began to write down the book, and then I was telling a friend of mine, I said, I'm writing this book called God's Not Dead, and he goes, well, that needs to be a movie. And he called the movie company and brought them to town, and I explained to them the challenge of young people on campus, and many times they lose in America, especially people, when they get to college out of high school, when they get into class and professors challenge them, they lose their faith. So I said, this is really something we're doing, this book I'm writing, to help stop that trend. So my friend wrote the biggest check for the movie, and I met the screenwriters and explained this whole drama on campus. And yeah, the movie got seen by about 30 million people.
Wow.
And went all around the world. So yeah, but it's, again, the goal was always for me to equip people to defend their faith. In fact, that's what I said to the movie people. I said, look, my goal in this is to see 1 million, in America alone, 1 million young people be able to defend their faith. So
right.
That's the ongoing goal. There's another movie that came out, a God's Not Dead 2. There'll be a God's Not Dead 3, and I'm sure it'll be like, Fast and Furious or Rocky. It'll just keep going till people just stop going to the movies. It'll be God's Not Dead 20, But yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
So the song inspired the book, and the book inspired the movie.
Pretty much.
Wow, that's an interesting journey. Now, you use the word apologetics, and I know a lot of our Victory Group leaders might know that word, a lot of them might not. But for the sake of our video here, how would you define apologetics?
Well, it's a Greek word that means to give a defense. Paul said, always be prepared to give a defense for the hope that's within you, yet with gentleness and respect. So it's not just the truth you share, but how you share it. So that word doesn't mean we go out and apologizing, hey, I'm sorry for how Christians have treated you. It really is a Greek word that means to give a word, to give a defense, to give a response. And so you don't have to be, you don't have to be a pastor, but every single person who believes and says, I'm a Christian, should be able to give a response as to why.
Everyone.
Everybody. In other words, that's not like, oh, well, only a few people should do that. Why? Because if you've trusted Christ, you ought to have some good reasons why you've done that.
Yeah.
It isn't like, well, I didn't have anything else to do, or I'm not sure, because that's not the kind of faith that God wants us to have. He didn't want to have a blind faith. There's evidence, there's reasons for why I believe in Christ. There's reasons I believe God exists, and that I believe Christianity is true, and other religions are not true. Not that they're not, don't say some good things, but I believe that Christianity is based on a set of historical facts that point to Jesus being the Son of God, worthy of my full trust and devotion. And I think everybody, if you're following Jesus, then that should be, you should have some reason for that other than I just feel better.
Yeah. Now, what would you say to Christians who say just exactly what you said? I don't know about the reasons, I just know because of how I feel. When I'm in a worship meeting, when the worship leader is singing, when the pastor is speaking, I feel it. How would you respond to people like that? Is that sufficient?
I think that it's not that I'm trying to disparage that. I'm just saying that, number one, if the feeling's not there, then does that mean that God's not there and your faith was just a moment, a feeling, a concert, an experience? And many of them facts have shown that people have had that kind of attitude and then they fall away.
Right.
Jesus explained this in the book of Mark. It's recorded where he talked about, seed falling on different ground. And he said one seed, when it falls on shallow ground, when the sun comes up, the seed, the plant withers. In other words, there's no roots. So you have to go deeper than just I feel something, because there's going to be better feelings. I'm sure that when the Apostle Paul was being beaten and suffering, that it wasn't like, well, my feeling, I just feel Jesus here. I mean, you have to have the kind of faith that whether it's in good times or bad, you are rooted and anchored in truth.
And I think that goes back to our discipleship process, where our second E is establish. And establish really means to make strong and to let down deep roots. And if we want to be successful Victory Group leaders, we have to let down deep roots for ourselves and keep growing in God and keep studying and make sure we do that in the people we disciple. Unless we want fruit that, if we don't want fruit, that will fall away.
But I think, and the other thing about establish is, and this goes back to that parable, because it says, Jesus said that you dig down deep to lay the foundation on the rock. And in discipleship, that's why our purple book, which is the book I'm most proud of co-authoring, it really helps you dig down deep so that whatever those rocks or those things inside of somebody can be excavated.
Right.
So that their heart can become good ground.
So I think one of the best things we could do as Victory Group leaders is do the purple book. If you haven't done it in over a year, do it again. And make sure the people we're discipling would do it as well. Now, going back to apologetics, Pastor Rice, how do you see this being important in the everyday life of a believer? And how would the lack of any discipline or training in apologetics influence a Christian?
Well, I think that apologetics is really important for my life. In other words, I preach the gospel to myself. Not that I need to lead myself to the Lord, but I'm just saying I'm reminding myself constantly the enormity of the universe and how small we really are, but yet in that smallness, the uniqueness of our position, and that we're here in this little piece of dirt.
Right.
And we've been given an opportunity to know God, the God of the universe, and so to me, making money, being successful, famous, 100,000 Twitter followers, whatever you think is the ultimate sign of having made it, is absolutely meaningless compared to the opportunity of having a relationship with the Creator. So apologetics, to me, helps defeat the roadblocks and the obstacles that stand in the way between me and that relationship.
I see.
And so whatever doubts come or fears come, apologetics for myself helps to dismantle that and deconstruct that. And then I just say it does that for the others. If you are blocked in your relationship with God, you have doubts or fears, and if you have sincere questions, then I want to be able to help level that obstacle so you can clearly see who God is.
I think that's very interesting that you would put it that way, because when we think about apologetics, it's often that we think, well, it's for those kinds of people, for those intellectual people, but you started with ourselves.
You asked me something in the last session, and I'll pick it up here. You said, what are some of the hindrances or reasons people don't share the gospel? And I would say, if I had to choose just one thing of why people don't share, is that I would say it's that they deep down they're not really 100% sure it's true. It may be valuable to them, and yes, it's true for me, but whenever I hear somebody go, well, I wouldn't want to push my faith on my children. And I'm thinking, well, you don't say that about the multiplication tables. You don't say, well, I wouldn't want to push 2 times 2 equals 4 on my child. Well, why would you not hesitate to tell the multiplication tables to your child, but you'd hesitate to tell the gospel?
Wow.
Because you're convinced 2 times 2 is 4. You're not really sure that Jesus is the Son of God.
Right.
You think that's more some kind of private truth versus public truth, like, E equals MC squared, or 2 times 2 is 4. So I'm convinced that the gospel is just as true as any math proposition. It's based on historical reality. The existence of God, which is evidentially verified according to Romans 1. He's made it clear through what he's made. Christ was a real person who came into history, lived in history, was executed by Pilate. If you didn't even have a Bible, you could know Jesus lived and was executed by Pilate, and you would know that his tomb was empty after 3 days. And so you have to, I mean, that demands an explanation. How could this man who did so much die like that and then his tomb be empty and then Christianity start instantly?
Right.
So to me, it's an historical it's historical data. It's not mathematical data, but history is no less investigated in a scientific way, where you use what's called the inference to the best explanation. It's like if a murder happens, murders only happen once. So you don't say, well, are we sure it's a murder? Let's see it happen again. No, the guy's gone. So you go back and look at the evidence of what happened and say, what's the best explanation? Here's the forensic evidence, here's the DNA evidence, all of that. And so we can go back and historically investigate the claims of Christ. And that's why 2,000 years later, the message is still growing strong because there's evidence.
Yes.
So I'd say that you've got to, apologetics, if nothing else, no matter who I'm in front of, I am absolutely convinced it's true. And I'm convinced that whatever problem is in the world, that it can be traced back to a breaking of God's law, which results in injustice, brokenness, all of the pain we're experiencing. So eventually, there's nothing you could talk about, from polluting the environment to abuse of women or oppression of women or human trafficking or corruption. There's no area in society that you can't trace back to something that the gospel can't solve and heal.
Wow.
I think that to know the truth and to make it known is a human right. So why, if something is true, if you were in front of somebody that had a disease and they didn't know what the disease was, it was killing them, and you knew what it was, to deny them that information would be criminal.
Wow.
So the gospel explains what's wrong with the human condition, and it's true. And so to not bring it up, it's not about my preference or opinion. Now, if I'm talking about how much I pray or what church I go to or some of my worship, well, I really love this style of worship. I mean, there's plenty of areas for opinion in our preferences, but when it comes to the basic gospel message, it is either true or it's not.
It's funny that you would describe it that way, because too often, and Christians just take this without fighting back, where we are presented, people of faith, as closed-minded, not willing to follow the evidence where it leads. But it turns out, as you're describing, it's really the skeptics who are doing that. And anyone who really wants to find truth and goes to God and says, look, could find it, would find it, and God would reveal himself to him.
You know, Richard Dawkins is the world's most famous atheist now. He wrote The God Delusion. Before him was a man named Anthony Flew. Anthony Flew, for years, was considered the world's most famous atheist. And before he died, he became a believer, not in Christ, but in God. And he wrote a book about his journey. And he said, I had to come to grips with the evidence from DNA. Because DNA is basically, in our human genome, is the world's longest sentence. So in the 1950s, James Watson and Francis Crick discovered DNA. In the 1990s, Francis Collins taught us how to open it up and read it, the Human Genome Project. By the way, I was in his home when I was writing the book Gods Not Dead, Francis Collins. So got to meet him and talk to him. So that was quite a joy and an honor just to have that brief moment. But the point is that in DNA is 3 billion letters of a sentence. Can you imagine getting a pocket text that somebody sat on their phone? We call it pocket text, where somebody accidentally constructed a text sitting on their phone. You wouldn't think that they could even construct a sentence by accident.
Yeah.
You might get a letter or a couple of words, but what about a sentence 3 billion letters long? That's the ordered information, ordered in sequence to the human genome. And that's what put Anthony Flew over. He said, I've said all my life that people should follow the evidence wherever it leads. He said, but I wasn't willing to follow it if it led to God.
Wow.
And he said, so I had to concede that. I mean, it was like almost reluctantly, out of all that he'd written, all he'd done, he now had to be faithful to that axiom of, am I willing to follow the evidence wherever it led? And he did. No evidence that he, fully went all the way to Christ, but he just said, I know now I cannot be in good conscience an atheist. When people come in and you have Bible studies and you have lessons, you do your lesson. Don't ignore the lesson that we prepare for you to do week in and week out. That's important. But once that group is over, as a good leader, you're able to see whether somebody was really listening.
That's a great
You
point.
know, and it's to say, hey, how are you doing? And what is it that kept you from really participating? And sometimes they'll say, well, I'm really bothered and I heard something, or somebody mocked me, or said, well, what about, what about this, or what about Genesis? I mean, you'd be amazed at the things that bother people that we want to, as good leaders, be able to help pull that thorn out of their soul. And,
right.
So I think that as a Victory Group leader, if you'll start with the God Test app and then go to the God's Not Dead app. Both are free. Download them. The God Test helps you engage in a conversation. The God's Not Dead app, you'll see I've got, leading experts on there that I'm interviewing, just like you're interviewing me.
Right,
I'm doing this with some of John Lennox from Oxford, mathematician, William Lane Craig, Stephen Meyer from Cambridge. I mean, I'll have more and more, because I've done a lot of these interviews with most of the leading apologists. Gary Habermas, who's a leading expert on the resurrection, Craig Keener, who's a New Testament scholar, who's written a 4-volume book, volumes on the book of Acts, an incredible New Testament scholar. So we're bringing as much as we can these experts in the dosage you can handle. I mean, some of these videos are like 5 minutes long. That's all they are. They're not as long as what we're doing here. So all that to say is that we're trying to bring the best to you. We have practical videos, like I showed at the one conference. Some of those videos, those are on the God's Not Dead app. So download those apps, read the God's Not Dead book, read the second book, Man, Myth, Messiah, which is all on the evidence of the reliability of the Gospels and the evidence for Jesus. And I wrote those with you in mind. I wrote those primarily for Every Nation, for Victory people. Not that I didn't write them for other Christians, but wrote them so that you would be equipped to be confident that the story is true. It is a true story.
Yes.
Learn these arguments. You may not see yourself as a campus minister or as a pastor. You may be just sitting in a Victory Group now, not really seeing yourself as being a Victory Group leader. That's not, but yet this kind of stuff of answering questions and being able to help people who doubt, that might be the very thing you're called to do. You might be you might be a business person, you might be a teacher, you might be an accountant, but you can really understand these arguments and this evidence, and you say, hey, I've got a unique thing. I mean, I've got a physicist that travels with me named Brian Miller. I hope to bring him here. But Brian is the most mild-mannered guy. He would have been working in some laboratory somewhere, but we forced him to use his mind for physics and learn, just kind of say, hey, man, why don't you talk on this, because you're a smart guy. If you get a hold of this, you could probably explain it better than we do. And he does. He's incredible. I mean, I go in and speak, and everybody kind of, when he gets and speaks, he's a rock star. So it's like, hey, we don't care if you come back. Can you bring that guy back? So, but I believe there's probably just hundreds of people like Brian Miller right here in the Victory Group system and in the Victory churches. And man, we want to know who you are. We need your help. We need you to step up and say, you know what, I haven't seen myself as being the typical Victory pastor or Victory campus leader, but maybe in this area of apologetics, that's who you are, and that could be your specialty. So come on, we're looking for you.
Yeah, leave a comment and contact your pastor. We would love to get in touch with you. Again, thank you, Dr. Rice, for your time. Thank you for equipping and empowering our Victory Group leaders.
Right.